This series is all about friendship. Friends are a huge part of our lives. They affect us on every different level, physically, emotionally, spiritually, romantically. Sometimes friendship stinks. It's hard. We face challenges along the way, being left out, someone not wanting to be your friend, getting into fights or having disagreements. Friendship, as great as it is not always easy. These relationships impact our daily decisions, our thoughts, our emotions. They can impact who we are and who we become. And while friendship is an important part of our lives, keeping friendships and having healthy friendships isn't always easy.
Say you're sorry! Say it! Rachel! No, I'm not! Say it! Say it! Oh, right. Rachel, you say you're sorry, or your sweater gets it.
Okay, that is my favorite sweater. That is my third date sweater.
Say you're sorry. What are you gonna do?
You give me back my sweater or it's handbag marinara?
Now, hopefully none of your friendships escalate to that kind of physical violence, but it is just a pretty funny clip with some truth behind it. Friends fight, maybe over seemingly stupid things, maybe over something much bigger. Finding, forming, and keeping healthy friendships is not always easy, and it's going to be something that you experience and work at throughout your entire life.
Whenever my two best friends and I try and decide on a place to go eat, there's always some sort of argument or fuss over who's going to make the final decision because nobody wants to be the one to make the decision, even though 9 times out of 10 we end up at Chick-fil-A.
The time I had conflict with friends was when I moved from a public middle school to a private high school, and my groups of friends did not overlap.
One time when I was hanging out with my friends, I took one of my friends off of aux and we got into a big argument about it.
My friends and I always argue about sports, whether it's who's going to win the Super Bowl, who's going to win the World Series, who has the better fantasy team, who's going to win that week.
Now, I hate to admit this because looking back on it, it is so embarrassing, but freshman year, my friend and I fought over a boy. Don't ever do it, ladies.
Jesus had friends, but even among the 12 apostles, some were closer to him than others. He told a couple of them off, and while he didn't fight, he did have some intense things to say sometimes. Judas and Peter are 2 of the most well-known apostles to have a conflict with Jesus, to disagree and even betray him, but they did so in really different ways. Peter denied knowing Jesus. At the Last Supper, Jesus predicted that one of the 12 would deny him 3 times. It says that Peter refused to believe that he could be the one to deny Jesus. He said, "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." And all the disciples said the same. Now, simply looking at the facts of this story, this was pretty cruel for any friend to do. I mean, denying even knowing Jesus 3 times as he's getting taken to the cross is one thing. But the night before, looking him right in the eyes and the eyes of all the other disciples and saying, "I'd never deny you." Well, that just has to throw a little salt on the wound, I would think. Now, to be fair, I don't think the night before that Peter was really planning on denying Jesus like that, but Jesus knew that it was going to happen, and he knew that it would still happen even with him warning Peter, and that had to hurt. Now, Judas was more directly confrontational with Jesus. Judas went to the chief priests and led them directly to Jesus. They paid him to turn Jesus over so that they could crucify him. And Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen with both of them. Now, we don't have the same ability as Jesus does. We don't get to know when conflict or hurt in a friendship is coming. However, we can still learn a lot about friendship through the way that Jesus interacted with his friends, even in conflict. We're talking in big church right now about how divided people are. No one can seem to agree these days, and it seems like we've pushed to divide ourselves about every issue: Democrat, Republican, schools opening or going remote, wearing masks or declaring our rights, Black Lives Matter or Back the Blue. That's just a few of the endless issues that we could disagree about. And if you're friends with someone for long enough, there will be conflict. If it's not disagreeing about one of those topics, At some point in our lives, we'll all be left out of something. We'll be hurt or teased. Maybe during COVID, your friends just forgot about you. You didn't see each other, and so you didn't talk. That hurts. How do we respond when our friends hurt us, when they disagree with us, they fight or betray us, or they just forget about us? Here's a little saying to remind us which friendships are worth keeping and which friendships aren't. A friend who fights fairly is a friend worth fighting for. A friend who fights fairly is a friend worth fighting for. Peter and Judas are a great example of this. Judas sold Jesus out. For a little bit of money, he turned him over to the authorities and ultimately to his death. Now, we don't know the motivation behind what Judas did, but he did show remorse. It says in Matthew 27, "Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that Jesus had been condemned, deeply regretted what he had done. He returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, 'I have sinned in betraying innocent blood.' They said, 'What is that to us? Look to it yourself.' Flinging the money into the temple, he departed and went off and hanged himself." Yikes. Judas never tried to make things right with Jesus. He felt guilty, sure, but he didn't fight fairly with Jesus. He was in it for himself, and that's a lonely way to live. Peter was different. After he betrayed Jesus 3 times, he was racked with guilt too. But unlike Judas, Peter overcame his pride and he went back to his friend. There's a moment after Jesus is resurrected and he's sitting around a fire with Peter. Remember, Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times. So as they're sitting around the fire, Jesus asks him 3 times, "Do you love me?" It's almost as if Jesus is saying, even though you deserted and denied me, even though I called you out a few times, even though we disagree and you're hot-headed, can our friendship survive all of that? And Peter answers, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you. I love you, Lord."
I'll help you fix your sweater.
I'll help you throw out your purse.
I'm sorry that I made you stop seeing him.
Well, I'm sorry I went out with him when I knew you liked him.
Friendship isn't always easy. There will be disagreements and fights, but a friend who fights fairly is a friend worth fighting for. Judas didn't fight for the friendship. Peter did. Monica and Rachel may have fought and flicked each other, but they said some of the most powerful words that can be spoken. I'm sorry. Sometimes that's what's most needed in a friendship, to fight fairly. We don't always get it right, but when we fight fairly, we can accept responsibility and apologize. And if we're asked, "Do you love me?" we can say, "Yes, you know I love you."